If it wasn't for Betty Tisdale, maybe I wouldn't even be here.
It's a moment 31 years in the making. For most, Vietnam in the 1970s was all about killing. For Betty Tisdale, Vietnam was about saving lives.
No matter where there are children, somebody has to help them.
Dan Burkholder was one of those children she helped. He's taken a trip to Seattle to meet the woman who saved his life 3 decades ago.
You know, she's the reason why I'm here.
When Evening Magazine first profiled Betty in 1999, she opened her Queen Anne home to us, telling her story that's been featured in Life magazine and on NBC's Dateline. Shirley Jones even played Betty in a 1980 movie.
This was just something that I wanted to do, that it's in my heart.
Known as the Angel of Saigon, this secretary turned savior fought for the forgotten children of Vietnam, not in camouflage or combat boots. She wore a dress and sandals. April 1975. The communists closing in on Saigon, Betty convinces the government to let her pack a plane with 219 little lives, transporting them from baskets to boxes to a new life in America.
People were lined on either side of this pathway that we made and thrusting their babies at me, saying, "Take my baby, take my baby."
All 219 are adopted within a month back in the States. Betty still has the original list.
Let me see, he was number 65. Here, Vu Van Dat.
It was the last time she saw Vu Van Dat, then 11 months old. He ends up in Pennsylvania and becomes Dan Burkholder.
I know that when my mom first got me, I was very malnourished. They thought I was going to be, not have the ability to walk. Come on, bud.
31 years later, he's a mortgage broker in Lancaster, Pennsylvania. Recently married, he's lived a classic American life with birthday cakes, leisure suits, high school dates, and a college degree.
Who could ask for more?
Dan says he hasn't felt the need to somehow find his biological parents or even to visit his birthplace. He's never thought of himself as anything other than American. But now that he's settling into his 30s, he does want to say thank you. So he calls Betty. They've never talked before.
The first thing that she said to me was, "I was waiting for your phone call."
They get to that point. It's not when they're young.
Dan does not want to say thank you from 3,000 miles away.
I don't think there's a perfect thing for me to say or not to say. I mean, I do know that I do want to say thank you. I think it'll just come to me when I meet her face to face.
To the airport he goes for his first trip to Seattle, for his first meeting with his Angel of Saigon. Today's Vietnam is a fascinating intersection of the modern world and ancient ways. But the Vietnam of the 1970s was not a good place for a child. Dan Burkholder was an 11-month-old Vietnamese orphan in '75. As he arrives in Seattle with his wife Amy 3 decades later, he contemplates what would have been.
If it wasn't for Betty Tisdale, I know that my life, and my heart and my mind, would be in a worse place. And maybe I wouldn't even be here.
Wartime courage usually comes from soldiers, not secretaries. Betty's unflinching resolve snatched Dan from certain destitution, if not death. She moved mountains, or at least governments and planes, to rescue as many children from Vietnam as possible in that spring of '75.
They probably would not have survived, and if they had, they would have been on the streets someplace. Oh, look at these sweethearts. Oh, why are you crying?
Back in Vietnam recently, she continues traveling the world, but still runs Halo, her nonprofit, out of the basement of her Queen Anne home. HALO, which stands for Helping and Loving Orphans, is still doing just that in Vietnam, and now in Afghanistan, Mexico, and Colombia.
Americans have the biggest hearts in the world. We do.
Of the 219 orphans she evacuated from Saigon that day, Betty thinks she's met about half. That first face-to-face contact never gets old.
I always hope that I hear from all of them.
When she heard from Dan 6 months ago, she immediately invited him to Seattle. Today, he will meet the woman who saved his life.
It took me a long time to realize that this is something that I want to do.
He's never done anything like this before.
Pretty anxious, a little nervous. I don't know what she's going to say, but can't wait.
With Dan on his way, we ask Betty what she expects.
My baby. I mean, I've seen pictures of him since I saw pictures of the wedding, so I know that he's older, and there he looks like, here he is. Hey, he was just asking me what did I expect to see, and I said, I'm very strong little boy. How are you, honey? I said, my baby, my baby.
Dan will never forget his angel, because his angel never forgot about him.